Good evening, everyone. Glad to have you joining us. We'll officially get started here in just a moment. But before we do, we'll enjoy some music to help people have a minute to join our gathering. Well, good evening once again, and welcome to all of you. We're very glad to have you joining us for this evening's conversation as part of our 2021 homecoming festivities. We started this event last year when we were entirely in a virtual context, but felt that it was a valuable enough gathering, a valuable enough time to continue to do this and to share together a little bit about the academic legacy of Eastern Nazarene College. This evening, I'm delighted to be joined by three panelists who represent various facets of the ENC tradition and its engagement with academic life. We have with us Dr. Lauren Ranstrom, Professor Emeritus of Education, who just this past year retired from the college after concluding 30 years of service in the education department at ENC, shaping many lives through his very faithful work in that area. We have also Professor Sherry Burt, who is in her 10th or 11th year, I guess it is, as laboratory manager and instructor in the Division of Science and Technology. We were discussing before the panel that apparently she has 31 total years of service at Eastern Nazarene College in a much wider range of service. And Sherry is obviously well loved as a member of this community. I believe, I didn't ask you this beforehand, Sherry, but I believe that the title she carries with the greatest gravitas is that of Schrader Mom. And We are Prof Mom. There it is. So we're very grateful for all that Sherry does in service of our students here. And then lastly, we're joined by Bruna Mora Iglesias, who's a member of the graduating class of 2020 and majored in biochemistry during her time here, and looking forward to hearing from her about what ENC meant to her, and also a little about sort of what she's doing now and where she plans to be in the future. If you are joining us in the audience, you do, of course, have the option of sending in questions. You can use the chat feature or the Q&A to send in questions that you would like to ask. We imagine this as a kind of free-flowing conversation for those of us who are here this evening. So Bruna, we'll go ahead and start with you. What can you tell us about what brought you to ENC? And when you think back all those years on your time at ENC, what would you describe as the most formative part, the most influential part of your educational experience?
Good evening, everyone. First, thank you for inviting me to participate to this. Very honored. And well, ENC has been a home for me. I'm originally from Brazil. I'm an international student, and I graduated back in 2020. So it's been a year and a few months since I flew out of the nest of ENC. ENC was not my first place when I moved to Boston. I moved to Boston back in 2014, and I started ENC in 2016. I did attend community college before, and I ended up finding ENC through friends. But I think what actually decided for me to stay and finally say, okay, this is the place that I want to be for the next 4 years, was mainly the family part, the community part, the caring, the loving. And that's something that I found. I did my VIP weekend back in June of 2016, and I felt so home in a home away from home. It's definitely what a lot of people might say. It's cliche, but it was definitely my home away from home, where I felt comfortable, I felt safe, and I was like, I don't want to keep looking for other places. You know, I think Boston, it's known to be a place of great universities, great colleges, and I was like, okay, I've been through the experience of being in a community college, going into a small school. How would that be for me? Is that something that I'm definitely looking for? Because I remember being on a biotechnology class before on a community college. I actually don't remember the name of my professor. I don't remember the name of a classmate at all. And I could be lying to you, but no, it's true, because I had more than 50 students in just an intro class that the professor probably also doesn't remember my name and didn't understand my struggles. I had to also help my mom financially. So I had to start working for the school back at the community college. And the most that I could probably get was like 2 hours a week, the most. At it was a competition all the time, and there was no caring on a big size of school. So I was definitely looking for a place that I could feel more comfortable, and ENC showed me that definitely. Since the day one, I'll never forget the VIP weekend. Professor Twining came up to me, and he was talking about the animal labs. And he was like, oh, do you like animals? I was like, yeah, I love animals. And he was like, yeah, but we don't have like fluffy, furry type of animals. I was like, okay, what type of animals do you have? So he explained me about it. And I ended up being a president for the Schrader, for the animals caretaker, our animal lab in Schrader for 3 years, I believe. So of course I fell in love. As I didn't lie to him, it was true. I always loved animals, and he taught me how to also appreciate all the animals that we have in the lab. And I think that's one of the things that I have definitely in my heart every single time that I think about ENC since my day one. Of course, I have no words to say for Prof Mom. Prof Mom has legit been my American mother, as I've called her. I have her phone number on my dial. Like, she's my first person to go anytime. And as I said, I graduated a year ago, and I think we still with the same relationship that we had back when I was a student, but better, because she's my friend. She's more than just a professor, which I actually never took a class with her.
True story.
Somehow I graduated with a biochem, not taking anatomy. And but I worked for her for 3 years and a little bit. She taught me so much. Today I work in a lab. One of the molecular technologists at Brigham and Women's, and I wouldn't be there if it wasn't because of ENC and all the experience that I've had. Thanks to everybody. I can pinpoint a lot of names and say it out loud right here, but I would say that everyone had a very important place in my life throughout my 4 years of ENC.
That's awesome. Thanks, Bruna.
Thank you.
Lauren, you've obviously found your way to ENC twice in your life. Same for Sherry, although the interval between those two, I think, was short or non-existent.
I think I just never left.
Yeah, just never quite left.
Never quite left.
Lauren, I'd love to talk first about sort of your student experience, right? What were the things that brought you to ENC? And when you think about your educational experience, what's most important to you as you look back?
Well, I started college in 1974, which was just a few years ago. And I don't think it was as high pressure as it is nowadays in terms of you got to get into your college kind of a thing. And I had a couple of cousins that had gone to ENC, and I applied at a couple of other places, and that one was close, which I lived in Weymouth, and I didn't necessarily want to stay home, but it was fairly close, and I said, that's where I'll go. I'll give that a try and see how it goes. And you may lose me for a minute on this. Didn't expect that. But I think my times are in their hands. They were probably there without me realizing it. And so, as I got there, and I mean, I was accepted. I have friends today that I went to school with, and when we see each other, which is, once every 10 years, maybe, it is just like it was yesterday, those kind of things. I had professors who cared for me. And I had always enjoyed academics, but I didn't know if I really was cut out for academics or not. But I left there, and I started out as a music major, and music is still a pretty significant part of me today, even though I never finished the major there. And then I switched into history, and my first profession, once I finally get into education, was being a 7th grade social studies teacher. And I enjoyed that so much that I ended up at the college at some point. But I left ENC with the understanding that I could do anything I wanted to if I put my mind to it. And that was because of the impact of faculty, and students or friends that I developed over the years. And like I said, that I still interact with today, whether it's through email or telephone, or we show up at homecoming and it's, oh, hey, how's it going? As if we were together yesterday. And when I left there, it was, you know, if I could come back and give like was given to me, that would be pretty good. And I didn't expect to end up like this.
Thanks,
So
Lauren.
it was a pretty significant part of my life. And I'll say this, as a student there and then being for 30 years, I've spent more than half my life here.
Yeah.
That gives you a sense of my age.
I can do the math.
Yeah.
Thanks to some good teacher I had along the way. Thanks, Lauren. I really appreciate that. And I know beyond any shadow of a doubt how many students there are out there who would say similar kinds of things to you and about you and the work that you did and the ways that you did give to them and to their lives. Sherry, what about you? How did you find your way to ENC? It must have been a very complicated process, I imagine.
So my parents are both alums, and when it came time for me to choose a college, my father was on the faculty here, my mom on the staff. I do think I sent out a couple of applications because I thought that's what you were supposed to do, but I had no reason to want to go anywhere else. This was a place that not only was it, close to home, but my friends were all coming here, and we were really looking forward to that. And I started out in biology pre-med, but the summer after my freshman year, God kind of got a hold of me and said, you know what, you're in the right major, but the wrong profession. And had me kind of to switch gears. And I can look back to two particular professors. Cindy Mengel Davis was here. She's also an alum, and she had started her teaching career just a few years ahead of when I got to school. And she was that professor that had high standards. She expected a lot of us, but she was present and she was available, and we could study outside of her office, and we could call her late at night and say, I don't understand this, and it's on the test tomorrow. And I think she was a woman in science. She went on to earn her PhD, and she teaches at a different institution now, but I think she was just an example of that kind of professor that went the extra mile, and that I think ENC is very well known for. Our student to faculty ratio gives us the ability to be present in our students' lives and to know a lot about them outside of the classroom. And similarly, Sharon Metcalf was working here, and when I was a sophomore, she asked if I would be lab assistant for one of our classes. And I said, well, sure, that's fine. And she said, okay, well, next week you're going to have to give the lecture. And I said, well, I don't really want to do that. And she said, well, you need to, it's part of the job. And I said, okay, that's fine, but I have no plans to be a teacher, so I'm not sure how practical this is for me. And she said, never say never. And interestingly enough, a few years down the road, she's the one that came to me when I was here as an RD and said, do you think you'd be available? We need someone to teach our nutrition classes. Do you think you'd be available? And so I really credit those two women who maybe pushed me in the right direction, saw something in me that I didn't see, and then without me knowing it, modeled what the kind of faculty member I wanted to be, because that's what was given to me when I was here.
That's great, Sherry. And I'd love to sort of stick with you here for a minute and ask kind of another question. One of the reasons that I specifically invited you to join is because of the kind of dual role that you play in your work with students, right? You teach some classes, but you're also, as the laboratory manager, you're also a supervisor, an employer, or somebody who's teaching students skills that lead to work habits and practices that inform what they may do later on.
Mhm.
So I just wonder, when you think about, what, I don't know exactly how to phrase this maybe, but what's most important in an ENC education, or what are you most consciously trying to impart to students? How do you think about that, or how do you see the signs of student growth?
I think especially in these last 10 years in my newer role here as lab manager, and you're exactly right, I realized quickly that the mentoring role I get to have in that position is different maybe than the classroom role. And what we've really, I think, done a good job here is creating a culture of both learning and legacy. And so our students are learning in the classroom, the theory, but then we are able to hire 20 to 25 students a semester to serve as lab assistants and stockroom assistants. And that gives them that hands-on training. Bruna was talking some about it. They are then responsible to set up equipment and prepare labs and work one-on-one with the faculty mentor. And as you well know, one of the best ways to learn something is to have to teach it, right? And so they are then solidifying the knowledge that they learned when they took the class by then having to pass it along to the next generation of students, and problem solving behind the scenes. And one thing that I've tried to do with our students that are working, especially in the stockroom, which is a less specific job, it's being in charge of all the labs and preparing and keeping things clean and organized, is starting out with, okay, I'm going to give you a specific job to do, and this will sound familiar to Bruna. And then the next would be, okay, what do you think we need to do? And then next, having them come to me and say, you know what, I noticed this would be better if it was this way, or I would like to take this project. And my favorite thing is when they come and say, oh, I noticed we have a new person starting. I would like to go show them. I would like to give them the orientation to the stockroom and how everything works. And I was going through the years today. Right now I have a senior working for me, and she's kind of fills that role of sort of helping with, supervising the students. And she was trained by Bruna. And then I can look back and think of David Daggett, who trained Bruna. And I was able to go back 10 years, student to student, who took it as not only their job, but how they were going to leave their mark by passing along what they thought was valuable, important in how to run things, how to organize things. And that's a level of kind of leadership above just learning how to do a task. It's how to think about, how does this run? How could it be better? What do we need to change? What resources do we have, and how do we best use them? And so then when I see Bruna or our other students who are in PhD programs and working in labs, they've taken those skills that they learned here because we have kind of the bandwidth to do that, to give our students those opportunities. When I was in graduate school, it was the graduate students that did that. It was not the undergrads. And so I feel like we're able to really give them hands-on learning, and then they in turn leave us a legacy of passing that along, leaving their mark with us. I love to see still people's handwritings on things when I go around the lab.
Nice. Bruna, I think Sherry actually narrated it there, but I lost track of whatever the different jobs were in terms of stockroom management and lab assistant and things that are jobs that exist, or things that you may have done. But I just wonder, as you think about that kind of work and how it played into your experience at ENC, how do you think that you were shaped by those experiences? What do you value out of that?
Well, I started as a biochem pre-med major. And I think I would say it's a lot of a Latino type of culture to say if you're either a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. But honestly, lately I've been saying that everywhere it's like that. And I think the amount of people that start the freshman year as a pre-med or pre-PT or anything that it's like a track major, those are the only majors that you actually see. And you know, it's promoted out in the world, and you're like, oh, I want to be that. As a little kid, you'll say, oh, I want to be a doctor, because that's mainly what you see, that it's an important position for you to be as a professional. When I started UNC, I had that vision, and I was like, I'm going to become a physician. That's my goal. Medical school. This is the track that I want. And right at my freshman year, second semester, I started seeing all the dynamic in the labs, all the dynamics of the prep, the stock room, and I start admiring it. I was like, hey, that's so nice that a student get the chance. And I was just talking to Prof. Mom the other day about it. I was like, I got motivated to apply and be somebody like that because I also saw it, previous students doing it. But my point on this is, after having so many roles inside of trader, as a stockroom assistant, a TA for multiple classes. I think there was a semester that I had like 5 job descriptions under my name, and I remember, and I was so proud and so happy about it, and I enjoyed every single one. The main thing that I'm actually realizing now is that giving up from my pre-med track throughout my 4 years of school and changing my path, today, all the experience that I gained throughout those years, it had shaped me to be who I am right now in the lab. And I know that I'm good at that. I know that I've learned so much from my hands-on experience that I had at ESC. And I'm so grateful for it, because now I can see that I don't have to just be one of those professions that are out in the world. But my profession as a lab technician, a lab technologist, I can build up a career into it. And I can go on and saying I can do a master's, I can do a PhD, and I'm still going to be fulfilled with that career that I chose, that 5 years ago I didn't know it existed. But because of the experience that I've gained throughout this, I'm so happy that I actually had the opportunity. And I'm forever grateful, because maybe I wouldn't know that if I had kept myself in a different experience. Maybe if I've never been a lab assistant or a TA, I would be like, oh, med school might still be my path. And honestly, it's not my calling. And I'm so glad that it showed me somehow.
Thanks, Bruna. Lauren, Sherry, in narrating a little bit about her ENC experience, mentioned a couple of people whose influence kind of specifically touched her and influenced her trajectory and her kind of understanding of herself. I wonder, as you look back at your time as a student, can you think of specific faculty members whose work especially touched your life, or whose example you tried to emulate in your own professional trajectory?
Well, when I was in the history department, you know, as a student, I had Dr. Cameron. And then coming back and being able to work with him was pretty significant. But, you know, the way he was, and the importance of academics, and the importance of historical thinking, and all the kind of things he did in his classroom was sort of pretty significant in terms of my thinking and what it would be like to be a teacher. And the same with Don Yerxa, Professor Yerxa, and coming back and being under their guidance while they were there. And I think initially one of my thoughts was, well, maybe I'd like to get a PhD in history and go back that way. And instead I ended up in a 7th grade classroom. So yeah. a little bit different, but you know, then passing on to students, helping them understand the importance of academics. And even very interestingly, I've been doing some substitute teaching, and even trying to pass on to these, you know, and I'm in elementary school. So, you know, yesterday I was in a kindergarten classroom. The day before I was in a kindergarten classroom. Tomorrow I'm in a kindergarten classroom. And helping them really understand the importance, you know, at that age of academics and learning and reading and all those things that are important. And because that's what was that's what was modeled for me by faculty members that I worked with. I remember I took logic as well with Dr. Kaufman. And I took it pass fail. And one of the interesting pieces was, and I worked pretty hard in it. One of the interesting things he said to me, I said, well, I don't think I'm going to take the final exam because I really don't need to. And he was he encouraged me to try and take the final exam because, he saw the work that I put in and those kind of things. And that's what I take away from that. And then with kids that I work with, try to say, this stuff's important. And you really need to think about what it means to be an educated person and taking heed to those kind of things. And, 5, 6, 7-year-olds, I hope it's planting a seed somewhere in their lives at some point. And that's what I hoped to do with students as well when I was working at ENC is understand the importance of relationships and working with kids. If the phrase I used to use a lot of times was if the kids like you, they'll run through the wall for you. And so you really have to form relationships so that the kids will really work hard and you can be there to support them and guide them along, as was done for me as I worked through my own educational experience.
You've built a perfect sort of segue, Lauren, to my next question for you, which has to do with kind of your philosophy of education and preparation, which is exactly what you're talking to us about. But as a professor at ENC, what were the things that you did, to really make sure that a student was ready? I mean, obviously, in education, you had a long list of these sort of licensing requirements and things that had to be checked off. But I mean, some of that is obviously really important. But what were the benchmarks for you, or what did you try to do to make sure that your students were ready for the work that they needed to do?
Well, obviously, it's the academic piece of things and really emphasizing that. And, teaching isn't just standing up in front of a bunch of kids and sort of doing something for them. It's, connecting with them and that kind of stuff. So I really focused on the idea of relationships and building relationships with kids because it's so significant and so important. And, over the years, I've had several cards that have been given to me by students, thanks for teaching me and some of those kind of things. But a lot of them talk about my devotional at the beginning of just about every class I taught was from Chicken Soup for the Soul. And there's seven sort of generic ones that have a number of different topics. And then there's actually 2 that are designed specifically around teachers and the work that they've done. And some of the stories in there were about kids who at one time, a child at one time who thought about killing herself. And because of 3 or 4 words that a teacher said to her, she changed her mind. And there were stories of kids whose mothers and fathers really didn't want them, and sort of how the teacher really became the mother and father to those kids. And so understanding that relationships is pretty significant. There was one that was about a kid who was in, I think it was 7th or 8th grade, and he was a pretty rough and tumble kid. And so the principal came down and said, and I can't remember his name, but Mr. Jones, can you take Freddie to be in your classroom? And the only reason he did that, it was because he knew Mr. Jones would take him. And he was the one that sort of took these kids. And they sort of made an agreement where he would do his work and then the teacher would let him draw. And when it came to the end of the year, it was a military family. So when it came to the end of the year, they were moving somewhere else. I don't know if father had got transferred or what. And he began to talk about the things that he didn't know about the kids because nobody told him. And his mother came by one day and she came with his portfolio of artwork that this kid had done. And the teacher opened it up and looked at it and was absolutely flabbergasted at how good it was. None of the other teachers kept his work. They threw it out. And then come to find out, he was a military family. He's in what, 7th grade? He was taking care of his special ed brothers and sisters, getting them off to school in the morning. His father was in the middle of combat in Iraq, and he didn't know whether his father was going to live or not. So really getting to know your kids. And the mother said he was too embarrassed to come, but you were his favorite teacher. You know, and helping kids understand the significant impact that they have in the lives of kids. The one about the girl who was going to kill herself, an art teacher walked by and put his arm around her one day and said, "Gee, you're doing a nice job on that artwork," and went on. That made the difference. And so helping kids understand that the work that they do with kids is enormously significant. And you have to be on your toes all the time with those kind of things because you're impacting lives. Little kids, older kids. And so you really have to be aware and conscious of that. And that's sort of, you know, I didn't have any of those traumatic things necessarily, but that's the way professors treated me.
Yeah.
And I try to strongly encourage students to get to those that are going out into teaching, to get to know your kids and connect with them and form the relationships, because they're really significant in their lives as they move through growing up.
Yeah. Thank you, Lauren. Sherry, again, you know, your role is so hybridized. So maybe you would think about this in terms of sort of the whole picture of a student's academic program. But when you think about, you know, how to know a student's ready and really prepared, what are the things that, you know, you see as sort of most formative for the students in the, you know, in biology, biochemistry? What are the sort of approaches that you think are making the biggest difference for those students these days?
I think, I mean, some of what I talked about before, and even, and when Bruna was talking about when she was at the other school, how competitive it was. And I remember a faculty member that came here from another college said she was so surprised that our students kind of hung out together. There's a space right outside my office. It's called the reading room. It's a place that students can study. And she was surprised that the students helped each other, because at the school where she came, it was very competitive and you did not want to do anything that was going to maybe give someone an edge over you. And she was so surprised that it was just the opposite here. And I think that's what I see. You know, you have students who maybe they're taking a class and they're a little unsure, and you know, they might need a little bit of help, but then they start, you know, getting together. We have those spaces, those opportunities where they can get together with other students. And this just happened the other day. I was sitting in my office and there were two students out in the reading room, and I overheard one say, "Oh, you know, I'm really having trouble understanding this." And the other one said, "Oh, here," and got a whiteboard marker. Think of it like this. What if you look at it like this, and starts writing on the whiteboard? And so, and they're by themselves, you know, there's nobody, they don't know I'm listening or anything, but I think they've already, as sophomores, learned that it's cooperative, and that they've been shown by their professors, if you need help, stop by, I'm right here. You know, we have services, certain services specifically, but I think all of our faculty are willing to jump in, and that models for them that that's what's expected. That if you can give something, if someone's struggling with something, then you can jump in and help. And that helps them as well. As I was saying before, if you're showing somebody how to do it, that just solidifies for you and gives confidence too to our students that, okay, not only am I studying for myself, I'm passing this along. And that's what I see going through, say when they're working in the stockroom and moving from asking, really needing very specific instructions, to kind of launching them their senior year, where they're coming and telling me, this is what I think we need to work on, you know. And I think that's someone that's ready to either go to grad school because they're going to be in the same situation. In grad school, they're going to be asked to teach, right? When I went to grad school, I was the only one that had ever done that before. You know, it was part of my fellowship was I had to be a TA, but none of the other students had done that. And I had been 3 years standing up and giving lectures and preparing. So our students are ready for grad school. They're ready for the lab to do research because they've had that opportunity. We have a lot of summer research and semester research with faculty that goes on, or they're willing to work as a lab technician or technologist because they know how a lab works. They know how it should be organized. They know what happens when you don't put in an order on time. You know, they know what happens if you run out of something, or, you know, how to be efficient. So I really think that that's kind of how we prepare students, not just for the theory, but for the practice of working in STEM. And I know I'm speaking mostly for biology and chemistry, but we have a great track record of that too in physics and engineering, you know, that hands-on experience in a nurturing atmosphere where we know you're going to make mistakes. It's kind of a lower stakes. And it's not that there's not consequences, but it's a safe place to learn and, you know, then figure out, as Bruna said, maybe this is really my calling. I didn't even know this existed before, you know.
Yeah. On that note, Bruna, what can you tell us? I mean, you've already mentioned the work you're doing and talked, at least in theory, about further graduate studies. What can you tell us about your future plans and what your hopes are for the years ahead?
That's the $1 million question. So I graduated, and in the midst of a pandemic, I was trying to find a job that could help me to pay my bills first, but also could give me the experience, because as an international, I had to be working on something that was from my studying field. Mm-hmm. And I started working at American Red Cross initially. So that was my first full-time position as a lab technician. And it is a manufacturing company. So at the beginning, I was like, oh, it's just a lab experience. Let's go. Let's try it out, which I'm also very grateful for. But I know now that manufacturing is something that I'm not looking into. I think the area of science, and I jump ahead of myself explaining manufacturing or the research academic area or the industry. So we do have different routes to go into just as a lab technician career. You know, I could go back to at academic levels that could be going into working for a school, working onto the research, or I could go into the pharmaceutical companies that are like those big pharma, like Pfizer's and things like that. Or I can go into manufacturing and working on the side of producing something in big mass and giving it out for selling and giving to companies or people. So that's something that I ended up learning after I graduated and I got into this working experience. Manufacturing, I turned out that's not something that I want to do, but I do want to try all the routes that I have as an opportunity. So I'm glad that I had that opportunity, and now I'm working on the clinical side. So it's only diagnostics. I do have quite an important role, especially when we had COVID tests. I would get more than 1,000 COVID tests every day, and I would do any type of manual extraction and run the PCR tests. So it is like very much of the back stage of all the healthcare, all the tests that are sent to us. Now I work on the molecular biology side, that it's mainly involving clinical diagnosis for cancer patients. So all the tests that are sent to us are all diagnosis for patients that might have been already in treatment or not, or new treatments, and includes from babies to any age. So that's something that I'm into. trial to see if that's something that I would definitely like to grow. I do have to say that going back to school, it is on my plans. And when I mentioned about the clinical side is that I can go into get my certificate as a clinical lab technician, which is as a standardized, any state actually has that. It's something that I end up learning and something that I would love to maybe one day talk to students that would be potentially interested on pursuing a career like that. I can go back to master's degrees and going into biotechnology and genetics, and eventually for a PhD. I'll be honest to you, at this moment, I don't know yet. And I'm letting my experience and God guide me throughout all the experience that the opportunities that come up to me. I do feel like sometimes I'm running against the clock. And a lot of people say, you're young, you still have a lot to learn. And I'm just grateful that I live in Quincy. So even though we're through Zoom, I'm right around the corner of UNC. I'm hoping to be at homecoming, and I'm very grateful for still being part of the school itself. Something that I always joked around throughout my 4 years of college, I said, maybe one day I'll come back here as a professor, but I don't know yet.
I think there'd be some people pretty excited about that if that were to happen. I just have maybe one or two other questions for any of you who'd like to ask, but we did get at least one question from our audience. It's a risky question for us to answer because we're probably going to leave somebody out. But one of our audience members is asking about current research projects that are happening at ENC. And so, Sherry, I'm hoping you can help me out since a lot of them are in your neighborhood over there. I mean, there's the ongoing projects in earthquake forecasting that are running out of our engineering program. That's been a project that's been underway for close to a decade now. Robert Logan is doing remarkable things that I don't understand. So Sherry or Bruna, maybe one of you could explain what's going on in that area.
Yeah, he's really brought some great things to the college, and just being here for one short year. And I'll have to paint some broad brushstrokes, but he works in neurology, specifically with various neurological diseases, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, but he has been able to bring a very small scale, doable set of research projects to do right here on campus in our building, working with DNA, working with fruit flies. We have a couple students right now that worked with him over the summer and are carrying out their research now. They will most likely get at least one, if not two, publications out of that. We have John Twinings' ongoing conservation and environmental research, which takes him to Costa Rica. I know he got put off a couple times now because of COVID, so he's very anxious to get back down there. But we've had students go both as a travel course and then stay and do their research there, and they've made some great discoveries, unique species in that world, and have received publications. And then Dr. Tenny Doane also does research on nanoparticles here in the chemistry department. And I know this summer, this is exciting to me, he had 3 students that had said they would work, and there was kind of a set defined time that this would go. And when they finished, they were like, well, can't we just keep working? Can't we just stay for the summer and keep investigating this? This is, so exciting. And I mean, man, that's what you want to hear, isn't it? I mean, it's summer, but they're in the lab and they're, having a great time. And again, those things often lead to publications, but if not publications, the next step would be an REU and a research experience for undergrads at another institution. And they come already having done, in-house research here before they even get to that. So again, I know that's very broad strokes there, but if you had more specific questions, we could certainly get those answers for you.
Yeah. And we should mention that, of course, although a lot of the research is happening in the sciences, there are other areas of campus where great research is happening. I'll just simply mention my former history colleague, and that I am not, can't really consider myself a historian anymore, but Dr. Nick Pruitt, who has been doing some great work with regard to immigration and religion in American history, and just published a book with NYU Press this summer out of his research. So some great things happening with regard to that, which I think is a good segue to what I think will make our final question for this evening. And any of you who want to answer this, I would love to hear your thoughts. But what do you think ENC needs to do to maintain, to expand, to develop in order to stay faithful to this idea that what we want to offer our students, as Bertha Monroe ever so famously put it, right? The best in education in partnership with the best in Christian faith. What would you say is most important for ENC to do if that's going to remain true in our identity?
One of the things I would probably say is building off of what I think Sherry and Bruno talked about was the idea of competition. And we don't do that. We want everybody to be successful and to find their place where they fit. And then they take that sense of cooperative, take the competition out, keep the cooperative in there, but also carry the message of Christ with them. And it doesn't have to be worn on the shirt sleeve necessarily, but it certainly is, it's very evident in observations. I was on a board called the Mass Association of Colleges for Teacher Ed. Oh gosh, for probably about 22 years. And it was interesting whenever we went to conferences or something, a lot of them, we'd go out to eat somewhere, and they knew there was something different about the way I approached social time together. And I didn't have to say anything. I didn't have to do anything, but it comes with observation. And I think that's really important, because it's really living the life that's visible. And I can remember talking to a superintendent one time. He said, we really like getting teacher ed candidates from ENC because there's something different about them. And I think that speaks volumes of the kind of things that we try to do in terms of putting people out, regardless of what the field is. And I think that's such a significant part of what we do as they leave and go out into the world. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but
I think it does. Thanks, Lauren. I really appreciate that. Sherry or Bruna, Lauren set a pretty high bar there, so I don't know.
I know.
Have any thoughts about what you would hope that ENC would continue to do in order to maintain those two pieces of our identity?
I think I'm trying to put together my thoughts here, but in building on the idea of the competitiveness and the fact of, I think we do a very good job on academic side. I was received very openly, and I was never judged. I never felt like I had to meet expectations. I was an RA. I was an assistant for resident directors. I was very active student on Schrader and out of Schrader. Because I had my professors, I had my friends being always honest and upfront with me, the same way that I was always with them. I particularly have always been welcome, and I'm forever grateful about ENC and everything.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Thanks, Bruna. I sincerely appreciate that. Sherry, is there anything that you would like to offer on this note?
I'd like to see us, expand. I think it's very natural from my profession and from Lauren's profession. We have those praxis, those experiences built in, and social work, and there's some others. I'd really like to see us be able to expand that so that all of our students, no matter what their major discipline, has that opportunity for that very practical, hands-on experience throughout their 4 years, because I know we've seen, and I know Lauren's seen, he spoke of what a difference that makes in really helping a student determine what they do want to do, what their calling is, and that they feel more prepared when they leave because they've already had a chance to do it, to try it. And so I'd love to see us be able to foster that in all of and some of that may be just thinking differently. Some may be, we have alums out there that can network with us and have opportunities, but just to kind of go in with that mindset that this is one thing that we can give all of our students.
Thanks, Sherry.
I mentioned I've gone back and done a little substituting. One of the interesting things is one of the buildings that I've worked in, there's 4 ENC grads teaching there. And there's another one at another building. So there's at least 5 in the district. And it's, it's pretty gratifying to see the work that they're doing, but to also know that they're making a difference for kids.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Well, Bruna, Lauren, Sherry, thank you all so much for being here this evening and for sharing your stories and your reflections on the influence that ENC has had, and especially the ways in which its academic tradition has touched your life. I know that I have been quite provoked, quite moved by the stories that you've told, and I'm grateful for each and every one of you. So thanks again for being here. Thanks for those of you who've joined us, and hope everybody has a good evening. If you're on campus, I think there's a women's volleyball game in progress, probably not quite done. So head over to Leahy. You can find Sherry Burt there in like 30 seconds. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you.